Today, we're going to talk about a new and an interesting topic, which is about shapes. Okay, we are going to talk about shapes. Okay, as you can see, this is a very interesting topic that we are going to discuss together today. Let's know what are shapes. First of all, there are two types of shapes. Okay, two-dimensional shapes and three-dimensional shapes. Okay, again, when I talk about shapes, you have to know that we have two types of shapes. Okay, the first type is the two-dimensional shapes and the other type is three-dimensional shapes. Okay, great. Now, first, let's talk about the two-dimensional shapes. Okay, we are going to talk about now the characteristics of the two-dimensional shapes. Two-dimensional shapes have two characteristics. Okay, the first characteristic means that it has some features, or when we describe the two-dimensional shapes, this is how we are going to describe the two-dimensional shapes. Okay, the first description is two-dimensional shapes are plane shapes that can be drawn on a flat surface such as a paper. Again, the two-dimensional shapes are plane shapes that can be drawn on a flat surface such as a paper. We can draw the two-dimensional shapes by ourselves. Okay, we can draw the two-dimensional shapes on a paper, and I'm going to show you some of these shapes that we can draw by ourselves on a flat surface of a paper. Okay, this is the first characteristic of two-dimensional shapes. The other characteristic is it has two measurements. Okay, a two-dimensional shape has two measurements. Okay, length and width. And we are going to know later on what do we mean by length and width. But for now, you need to know that two-dimensional shapes have both length and width. These are the two measurements of the two-dimensional shapes. Okay, because they only have two measurements, that's why they're known as two-dimensional or 2D shapes. Okay, we call them two-dimensional or 2D shapes. Okay, and as I told you, I'm going to show you some of the 2D shapes. Okay, some examples now. Okay, now the first example of a 2D shape is this one. This is called a triangle. What is it called? A triangle. This is how a triangle looks like. Okay, so this is our first 2D shape. Remember that 2D shapes have two measurements. The length, this is the length of a triangle. And what is the width? This is the width of the triangle. So the side is the length, okay? And this is the width. The side is the width. So if I want to measure the triangle, this is the length of the triangle and this is the width of the triangle, okay? Now we're done with the first 2D shape. The other 2D shape is the square. This is how a square looks like, okay? This is the length of the square and this is the width of the square, okay? So this shape is called square. What is it called? Square, okay? Now, let's move on to the third 2D shape. It's called rectangle. What is it called? Rectangle. Okay, this is the length of the rectangle and this is the width of the rectangle. Okay, now this is the fourth 2D shape that we are going to talk about. It's called circle. What is it called? It's called a circle. This is how a circle looks like. Okay, now we're done talking about the 2D shapes. Let's move on and talk about the solid shapes. Okay, what are the solid shapes? Solid shapes are the 3D shapes because they have three measurements. Okay, they have three measurements, which are length, width, and height. Again, length, width, and height. Okay, so a solid shape is known as three-dimensional or three-dimensional shape. Okay, again, solid shapes are 3D shapes because they have three measurements, while the 2D shapes have only two measurements, okay, which are the length and the width. Now we are going to add one more measurement to the 3D shapes because they have three measurements, okay, which are called length, width, and height. Okay, so this is the main difference between the 2D shapes and the 3D shapes. Okay, a solid shape is known as three-dimensional or three-dimensional shapes. Okay,